Okay. First order of business is approval of the November 5th meeting minutes. Is Todd here?
I'm here.
Hey, Todd, are you happy with that whole transparency issue?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, okay. So all in favor of approving the minutes?
Aye.
Aye.
Yep.
Okay. Opposed? Abstain? Okay, the minutes are approved. Now, are there any public comments? Anybody want to, CJ, is there anybody that would want to make a public comment?
I don't see anybody in the waiting room.
Okay.
Anyone else in addition?
Okay, so John, we're going to move on to your presentation. This is John Dennis.
Okay, well, thank you for the privilege. Let's see, start slideshow, play from start. I guess we'll give that a shot. Yeah. So that's full screen. So let's see if I can get my mouse over there. So these are 3 bulk storage pads from which a lot of dust came. The main source of dust generation was here at what I'll call a drop zone from the main conveyor belt. And then trucks would take it over and dump it. They continue to do that. And so in March of
2017.
2019, a small foundation called Our Children's Earth Foundation brought a Clean Water Act lawsuit against Cargill. Okay. And then an out-of-court settlement was reached in March of this year. And the biggest deal was Cargill's planning to build a $5 million building to cover this particular salt pad. And some people asked, well, you know, why not the other 2 salt pads? How about the 2 that are over on Stone property? And I don't talk to Sean Wazinski as subsequent to the lawsuit, just somehow that broke down. But my understanding is, my guess is that this salt has ferrocyanide anti-clinging agent. You're on the road looking down, you can see kind of a bluish tinge, which is the newer, probably higher valued salt product, which does not have the ferrocyanide in it. Anyway, this is the site. Railroad cars maybe ship half the salt on a really busy day in January 2 years ago. I think they had 160 tractor trailers on the day, so it can get very busy on the sometimes it'll salt. One of the agreements was that they would actually purchase a road sweeper, and initially they were just going to clean up the internal roads, but with a little pushing they said, okay, well, we'll clean up any salt spills out on the road here as well. Yeah. So let's see, next slide. Sorry, I've got 17 slides, so I better pick up the pace here since we're doing this in 10 minutes, right?
Well, we'll give you 20 minutes total and then 10 minutes for question and answer. So do you want me to take over here for the next few slides, John? Okay,
absolutely.
So there was a problem with general salt deposition in the area. And this is an example of it here. This was at our Station 1 site, which I'll show you briefly, actually right near where Robin lives, her neighbor. So this is salt deposition from the salt mine coming from that conveyor belt, which is dropping salt down, and the fine portion is, depending on the wind, gets blown around. So we did a salt deposition. Next slide, John. Other way. Yeah. So we did a salt deposition study. We had triplicate samples. Could you back up one?
Sure.
We set out triplicate buckets to collect salt or deposition both during dry periods and during wet periods. And in this study, we had 3 dry periods and 3 wet periods. And this was done in 2017, mainly in the late winter and springtime, before there was much leaf out. So this is site 1. This is right near Robin's house. And then the transect keeps going. So this is about 250 meters from these salt piles here. And then we had a control way off in the distance at 4 kilometers away. Okay, next slide. So these are the results. And we had, again, we had 3 wet deposition events and 3 dry deposition events. And you can see there's a real, the transect starting, 250 meters away from the salt piles and then going out to almost 600 meters, I believe. Yeah, 598 meters. And then the control, which was 4 kilometers away. And both dry deposition and wet deposition showed a similar pattern. So these are what the results look like. And we had a range of deposition of 25 to 48 times what the control site showed. And so this was in 2017. John got Cargill to clean up their act somewhat, and another study was done this year. You want to go on to the next slide?
Yep.
And these were sites 1 and 2, the barn and the power line. They're actually sites 1 and 2, and then a control. And this was the 2007, based on the 2017 data, the brown, and this was what was found this year. So it looks like a substantial reduction. However, John, do you know how many samples that Jeremy took?
I think 3 round samples in April.
Okay.
April, May.
So these numbers here are based on only 3 rounds. And I don't know, Robin, have you seen any more salt deposition around your house?
Sorry, I just had to unmute. It's not been as bad this year, but I don't have any real scientific basis for saying whether or not I've noticed any difference.
Well,
but we might be a little further from some of the other folks.
Yeah, but you were certainly, I mean, you were near site too, so you were pretty close.
Yeah, it's from what we can visually see, like the damage has been done, the trees are dead, and things have rusted, and the damage has already been done, and I'm glad that they've mitigated it. This makes me relieved to see that it's scientifically there's not as much deposition, but there still has been some environmental damage here that's been done, and I may not see as much salt, but we've definitely had to replant trees and change things around our home to accommodate the previous amount of salt. So
Okay. Okay, thank you.
About how many years was this going on? Is this like 50 years of deposits, or is it a relatively new thing that those piles are where they are?
Well, I can't tell you that exactly, but we have aerial photos from our home that were taken, Paul might know, that were taken like shortly after the house was built, and the tree kill was not extensive the way it is now.
The piles were there?
I don't know what was going on in the 70s, but I think it was related to the fact that they moved them from that further, more distant salt pad to this closer one. whenever that move happened.
Let's, in order to keep things on schedule, John, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, sure. So the SPDES permit in 1983 limited, this is outfall 1. Cargill has, there's a total of 14 numbered outfalls that contain mostly surface runoff, but the surface runoff picks up brine from the salt pad. So this one is particularly important. And in 1983, so Cargill bought the facility in 1970. The DC was created, I think maybe the same year. But in 1983, the SPDES permit limited salt output here to 250 milligrams per liter, which is the drinking water standard. And Cargill basically told the DC, there's no way we can comply with this. So the permit writer in Albany increased the allowable limit to 40,000 milligrams of chloride per liter, as you can see here. And, you know, the chloride content of seawater is about 19,400. So, you know, I think it's, you know, questionable whether that permit should ever been allowed to be that high. But the other thing going on here is there's no limit on flow. The permit just uses the word monitor. And there was another discharge which wasn't, so this permit covered maybe at most half of Cargill's landscape that they own. And there was a discharge into Gulf Creek that wasn't part of the permit. And when we informed the EC that one too had salinity twice the, you know, the salinity of seawater, they said, you know, we better do a permit review, which is an unusual activity because DC is really overstretched and they only review permits sort of under very pressing circumstances. But one of my conclusions of this talk is to say that it would be really useful if some entity at the town of Lansing could send a letter to the DC expressing concerns that the new permit be suitably risked. And I could go into that later. Here's just another shot of this drop zone that created most of the dust. And this device here, it's kind of a hanging cone sort device. Cargill's working to improve this to, you know, reduce the amount of dust. But there have been days in the past 3 years when you could stand at Stewart Park and see a large plume of dust, you know, just up in the sky, you know, from whatever that distance is, you know, 2.5, 3 miles. And that isn't happening anymore. So I am optimistic that they've got a better, you know, a better funneling device, and maybe they're not running the conveyor belt on windy days. I'm just not sure what they're doing. So runoff is the other issue that the settlement really addressed, you know, for a new SPDES permit. This is Gulf Creek down here. There are saline seeps. So right here, you can see them are the 2 other bulk storage pads that Cargill uses. And as part of the settlement, they agreed to decommission and not use this one until it could be upgraded. So I think right now they're just using this one, but there are saline seeps suggesting that salt is coming here. And there is a ditch which comes down to Portland Point Road where we sample it. And then it goes under the railroad tracks. And so that a part of the settlement is to create a pump and treat program where they'll actually capture the brine that's coming out of a culvert up here, pump it over to salt pad 2, and then put it into their processing process. So I think they do monitor specific conductance on stormwater. And when it gets above a certain limit, they send it to their DI facility, deionizing plant. Fortunately, you can't see that in this particular picture. So anyway, runoff's a big deal. And this agreement, the settlement only lasts for 3 years. And the Our Children's Earth Foundation and Super Law will be sending their engineer, their expert, to just make regular visits to see if you know, the building gets built here, whether the pump and treat you know, actually gets put in place. Cargill says they have a pipe that pumps the brine from, you can see this little dark area, this is the brine pond. and it wasn't clear whether somehow this pond was leaking. There is a fence around it. It has a plastic lining, but Cargill said, oh no, we pump it all this distance over to here. It's part of our processing process. So anyway, hopefully this will get, under more scrutiny, will be managed a bit more rigorously. The weigh station here was also not part of the SPDES permit. And I think the new SPDES permit will include any salt runoff from this area, which eventually makes its way over into MINNEGAR Brook. And let's go to another slide. This shows the landscape. It was complicated a little bit. The pink zone here is owned by Cayuga Crushed Stone. And originally the lawsuit was named both of them as defendants, but there was a problem with service or something happened, and the plaintiff ended up being just Cargill, and I think that's fine. But this triangle here is what we call the unpermitted brine drainage field. So probably for the last 30 years, the seawater concentration brine has been, if you look at this area from the lake, you'll see it's a Phragmites habitat. That's seems to be the only vegetation that can grow there. And Tom at one point said that the salinity levels, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, are similar to the coast of Maine. And because our native vegetation isn't adapted to being on the coast of Maine, there have been areas of die-off. This is another one that may have, it may take many, many years for the salt in this soil profile to wash out and sort of recover. And similarly, it could be that the aquifer underneath here has also been salinized, but there are no wells to sample, so we don't know about that. I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit here. I think we can skip the chronology. I mentioned Cargill buying it in 1970. No, too much detail for tonight. We did start our research in 2015, so this was really a 4-year undertaking. Cargill also did not agree to pay for any monitoring or to any environmental goals like lowering the salinity. Right now, if you sample MINNEGAR Brook, the conductivity is about 1,500 microsiemens per centimeter, whereas the lake is 400, 440 maybe. So it's about 4 times as conductive, meaning there's a lot more chemical in it. And here's an example here's the table of contents of the best management practices, which Cargill has pledged to implement, but voluntary, something that the DEC is making them do. You can see the word good housekeeping here, facility discharges. Anyway, lots of details. We hope these best management practices get implemented rigorously. Here's Cargill's sketch of what the new $5 million building will look like. And Sean Wilzinski, I think, did tell the town planning board that they've decided to have the roof earth tone rather than white. So, I think we'd all agree that's probably a good idea.
I think they decided on green.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. So we could stop for questions here. I had a couple of slides about risks of continuing to mine under the lake. So maybe I should just rush through those and open it up for questioning. How are we doing for time?
I'll give you another 10 minutes. That includes
Okay.
questions and answers.
Gotcha. So I'll do this quickly. So this is the 2019 map that Cargill, they send an annual report to the DEC once a year, and their fiscal year seems to end at the end of November. So this is the 3-year mining plan. So this has already been mined, these panels. So here's Portland Point over here. 1984, they came out, mined across the lake, went under the Cayuga Nature Center. And this little circle here is where they had a problem with high rates of room closure. And you can see this panel, you probably can't see it, but this one's slightly wider than any of these panels. So initially I think they had some technical problems here. You can also see mining south, they have several thousand acres of mineral rights, going down towards Ithaca, and just couldn't, the geology wasn't behaving properly. Bill Capel at USGS, he's very close-mouthed, but he said, John, miners heard noises that miners never like to hear, which is a reference to microseismic events where rock actually breaks. Occasionally they have evacuated the mine to sort of wait and see if anything bad happens. But this distance from here up to, here's shaft 4 here, is about 5.5 miles. So this layout is really very inefficient compared to their competitor, the American rock salts mine, 65 miles to the northwest. These red circles are geologic anomalies where the glacier 10,000 years ago gouged down into the limestone, weakening what we call the carbonate beam, the strong stuff which keeps the lake from falling into the mine. So initially when Cargill was mining here, they mined under anomaly E, I don't know if you can see that letter, without informing the DEC that this anomaly was even there. Because if they had been told not to mine here, they would have had difficulty accessing, tens of millions of dollars of salt that was along the west shore here. When they got here, they hit an anomaly D and the Frontenac Point anomaly, which actually goes across the lake here. But they agreed to respect a 1,000-foot setback, not to mine into this area. But here, we thought that they would again set up a 1,000-foot setback, but they did some drilling up in to see whether there were pockets of brine that might leak into the mine. And apparently they decided if they used large pillar technology, it would be safe to do this. Our geology expert, John Warren, he's an Australian world expert. He says, I remember him telling John, this is all one big anomaly. The glacier didn't stop and start. It's a big gouge that comes all the way through here. John Warren thinks it's a bad idea to be mining anywhere near these anomalies. So we're not saying the sky is going to fall in on the mine. To us, it looks like they're taking unnecessarily risks rather than mining under land. The reason they like mining under the lake is that water has a specific gravity of 1, heavier, so they can have a much higher extraction ratio, per acre than they can under land. Because the further you get from the lake, the more and more layers of rock you have. So I think that's about it. Just a quick shot. This is some legacy. This is a culvert that goes down to Portland Point Road. I was standing, right next to the highway in the highway right-of zone when I took this picture. But Cargill probably doesn't know where this culvert goes. And there's the similar one that's leaking and sending brine into Gulf Creek. They had no idea it was there. And they sent a robotic camera in, and I think it got in about, maybe less than a quarter of a mile. And these culverts seem to date back from the 1930s. So it's something that Cargill's agreed to pay attention to. Mention the issue of subsidence. This is the southeast corner of Rogues Harbor Inn. You can see this kind of interesting deformation on the building, and this might be related to mining. This building is over 2 mining voids, the number 4 salt and the number 6 salt, and just a stone's throw away, a little more to the east, there's an area where no mining occurred. And it's at those kinds of junctures between no mining and the beginning of mining that you could get some kind of tilting or unstable activity. Whereas further out, in the center of the mine, under the land, anything could ride down together and nobody would notice. Anyway, that's it. Any questions for Tom or me?
So John, I just had an opportunity to check with my husband who doesn't park in the garage, and he's saying that he still sees salt on his car in the mornings, and he just has a car wash pass that goes every day, gets his car washed. Is that because I think I heard you say 2 of the 3 pads are not covered at all, just the one is?
Well, none of the 3 pads are covered right now. And I will mention, I drove over there a couple of days ago, and I was surprised that only the northern pad, the one closest, has salt stored on it. The other 2 are more or less empty. So this one is just about full and it's tarped all the way down, whereas the two over here are empty, which is unusual. You know, usually this time of year, all three of them are full, ready to ship salt to various places. But so I think, you know, we need to do more monitoring and just see whether maybe April, May of this a quiet period, maybe there wasn't much wind, and now there's more wind. But definitely it needs further study, Robin.
So how did they arrive at the results of the salt levels being brought down to the same as the control if they're not covered? How was that achieved?
Tom, do you want to speculate about that? It could just be that. So part of the problem is, I think our previous studies, Tom, in 2017 weren't April, May, weren't they a bit before that? And then there was also sampling after that.
Yeah, they were before leaf out.
Oh, okay. So just a timing of your phenology thing, really.
It could have been a timing thing why we got these different results.
Okay, well, that explains why there's not much difference in the southern hemisphere.
I'm sorry to hear that. We were pretty happy when we saw those graphs. We were like, wow, what a change! But
that's not due to any covering or remediation yet.
Well, the one change that has happened is probably a better dropping device, that kind of cloth sack where the salt is dropping through. I think they're making an attempt to keep that closer to the pile, to the ground, and kind of, you know, they're paying more attention basically than they used to, I think. But there's still a lot of room for improvement. And I'm hoping that the new building, that the drop zone will actually be inside that building. But according to this picture, you know, it actually looks like the drop zone is here and the building only gets to here. So, or no, wait, sorry, it comes under this road and it looks like the end of the conveyor belt is still outside of the building. And we were hoping that it would be like a controlled environment, that the dropping could happen inside and they could somehow, you know, actually filter out the air before, you know, the
John,
air.
That was my understanding, is that they were going to do it inside the building.
You know, that'd be a great question for your committee to put to the mine manager. I'm sure he could give you an answer to that, you know, very quickly.
I had a quick question about those the panels under the lake. The proposed ones look wider than the ones that they have already mined. Is that really the case? So
right at the beginning here, so this particular main conveyor belt, this is Northwest 3. They hit some anomalies here. They came in halfway to the lake, went up Northwest 2, hit more problems. Now this is called Northwest 3. So the short little adits or mining panels are narrower, and then when they get out here, they suddenly get wider. So they go right here. They're still using small yielding pillar technology, which has, you know, can give an extraction ratio of maybe 70%. As soon as you start using the large pillar, so large pillars are like 90 feet by 90 feet. They're big chunky things. Small pillars are 12 feet by 15 feet, you know, roughly speaking. So your extraction ratio drops. It's less profitable, but you can reach all this salt over here. So you want to be able to figure out a way to safely mine under these anomalies. But the other thing, and there's also ventilation problems. It's much harder to clear toxic gases from explosions with large pillars than with small yielding. So where they can, and the reason that this is safer is that the gouging occurred, you know, the glacier was gouging kind of out near the middle, but there's also, you know, so there's just more rock. The lake isn't as deep here. So they're continuing to use the small yielding pillar here. And by the way, we don't have a line here, but anomaly A is straddling the permitted reserves. So right now, Cargill can mine up to about here under their existing permit. And it's my guess that, you know, in 1 or 2 years, Cargill will apply last summer's seismic study went all the way up to Long Point, which is about twice this distance. You know, it's sort of this footprint once again, if they were to mine all the way to Long Point. The strata are updipping. So you're losing 70 feet of protective rock for every mile you go north. This distance being about 6 miles. I think right up here at Milliken Station, you're at about mile 7. Sorry,
We're gonna have to
missed up
stop there.
Yep.
Okay. So,
John, that was concise and really informative.
Well, thanks so much, Carrie, and thanks to all of you for the privilege of talking with you. And if anyone has more questions, just shoot me an email. And I did talk to the super law attorney today, and he said he needs to check in with Cargill's attorney to see what progress they're making on implementation. So anyway, there's more to be learned. Thanks.
Hey, John, can you send me the Willett citation you have here, the 2010 citation? I want to know more about what these anomalies really are.
Sure. I'm not sure there's an act. That may be a citation that we saw in a Cargill report. I'm not sure if we have the full. I'll see what I have for that. Todd. All right. Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank
thanks,
you.
John. It
Bye.
was very, very good.
Mhm.
And I will say goodbye. So let's see. Leave. There we are.
Bye-bye
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll see you, John.
There. Yep.
Okay. Does anybody have any comments about John's presentation before we move on?
I guess I'll only say that I learned a lot. It was very good.
Yeah, a lot of information there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm still confused as to what exactly are the concerns. I mean, I think that the salt can really have a bad impact on the soil. If it just gets into the lake, it's going to settle to the bottom, right? That's going to be the densest water, so it's going to be out of the biosphere. So
Well, no, not necessarily. So the level of salt of sodium in the lake is twice what's acceptable for drinking water for people that are sensitive to sodium. So we already have a pretty high level of sodium in the lake, and Seneca Lake has even more.
And do we have confirmation that this is due to the mining process and not sort of a natural process? We have lots of salt just occurring here naturally, right?
Right, yeah. No, I don't think there's been a quantitative study on how much salt in the lake is from the mine.
Right, and we have tons that's from road salt spreading, right?
Yeah.
And so that's not the mining activity. That's we all agree that we want to have our roads be safe. So we spread tons of road salt out there. And so our aquifers are really high, have high elevated levels of salt because of that activity, not because of the mining per se. I mean, they're linked, of course, right?
Mhm.
So I think we want to be careful moving forward that we're very, again, this is like my whole thing, right? Let's be transparent. What do we know? What do we not know?
Right.
And not pretend that we know things we don't know.
Would that comment still apply to creeks like MINNEGAR Creek that was affected? Would you expect that to be naturally saline?
Not at the level that it's at.
Well, we see,
And it was like 400 times, I don't know, I made that number up, but it was many times higher than what it should have been, right? That's what
right, but there
was
are
heard.
some natural saline springs all through the southern tier that are well documented by the USGS. So
Yeah.
I would want to go back and look at those and see what those elevations are and compare it to this to make sure we're attributing at least a logical cause and effect, rather than just sort of making something up because, oh, we found this one
Right.
hot spot and we make.
Well, it would be good to know the actual mass of sodium chloride that's coming in to the lake because of Cargill. But I don't know how you get that number very easily.
I'm not an aquatic ecologist, but the deposition studies were done, at least one of the samples was on my land, and that was just kind of like a bucket array that they set out in our forest, which you would not expect to have salt deposition in a forest. And as you saw from the data, at least the terrestrial distribution of salt on the neighboring properties is high. So I don't know how that affects the lake or whether that salt coming from the lake, it was already making the lake saline, but clearly it shouldn't be affecting the terrestrial environment. Not to the level that it is.
Yeah, Robin, I don't know the particulars there, but Dave Bolden had some really good data from Fall Creek Watershed, showing from the 1950s through the 2000s, huge increases in base flow, summertime salt concentrations. And I think those can be pretty well tracked back to road salt spreading. But yeah, if you have a force,
we're nowhere near a salted road in where I'm at. I don't doubt what the data that you're.
And are you on the top of a hill? Or are you like, or are you in a lowland?
We're at a high. Well, it's not high, but we're at a high point on an unpaved, unsalted road. I mean, certainly some road salt could blow over from a quarter of a mile away, but you can stand on my property and see the salt piles, and you can watch it blow over, especially on days that they've been.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, no, if you're up high and
putting it down the chute,
and you're getting salt things coming in, there's definitely something different.
And it may be just a very narrowly affected radius that is getting that aerial pollution. I can't speak to the rest of the lake or the discharge, but
fair enough. Good.
From a terrestrial perspective, you can taste it in the air some days. At the risk of sounding dramatic, some days it's like that.
No, I'm a huge critic of salt pollution, and yeah, so I'm not, but yes, I think we need to be able to tease apart what are the sources that are really going on here. Cornell's, if we look at Cornell's drainage system, the salt concentrations coming out of their drains are as high as the ocean. Okay, but that's clearly because they spread. I mean, Tom and Dave can attest to this, right? Like they just put tons of salt everywhere. When we see salt traces on the sidewalk out way into the summer, right? So yes.
Sure.
Okay, well, we should probably move on. So instead of going right to agenda item number 5, I wanted to also include the membership recommendations that were up for renewal. So we have 4 people: Karen, Andra, Robin, and myself. And I believe everybody has applied or is reapplying. Okay. So is the rest of the committee happy with that?
Very.
Yes.
Thrilled.
Yeah.
Thrilled. Oh, okay, that's exciting. Okay, so let's move. So we're going to go forward with that, and I guess we'll be reappointed next year.
Do we need a formal motion, or can we just say?
Okay, yeah, let's have a motion to support the reappointment of the 4 members. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second it.
Any discussion?
I think it's a great idea.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? Okay, sounds unanimous.
I have a question. Is this a 1-year appointment or a 2-year?
I think it's 2.
2-year.
Is that,
It
didn't we?
was 1 year this year just to stagger the appointments, because we were all originally appointed at the same time.
Yeah, and CJ, what's the process of getting new members? I think it's great to have a rotating group. I don't think we should all be the people that are in charge of this forever.
Yeah, I'll share that with you. There's essentially a board appointment process. I'll just drag and drop it right in here. But when folks are coming to the end of a term, or there would be a vacant position, we essentially advertise and go through the process that we're going through right now. So in some cases, folks either don't want to renew or want to resign for whatever reason, and the spot becomes vacant, and so folks can apply.
Okay, and one thing that was really good, I think, with this first group is you have a really diverse suite of landowners here, and so the degree to which you can maintain that, I think, would be important going forward. Having people like Andra and John who like their livelihood comes from being part of this landscape. I think having those types of people on the committee is a good thing to maintain.
That's a good point. Like some other boards I've been on have some guidelines like that.
We
Just-
have that.
Yep, there are.
There are
So
guidelines.
let me just paste those in the window for you so you can see kind of what the,
Oh,
you know,
That's fine, as long as they're there. That's great.
stated priorities are. And of course, town board makes the final choice on the membership. So,
Okay, great. Thank you, CJ.
yeah, sure.
Okay, let's move on to EPODs, Environmental Protection Overlay Districts. So CJ sent out, or was it? What, Carrie, were you the one that's, well, one of us, CJ or Carrie, sent out some examples of what is proposed and for the town of Lansing.
Just to say, CJ, you can comment further, but this is all very preliminary. This is like a sneak peek into the future. And essentially the CAC eventually, did I already misspeak, CJ?
Oh, no, I just thought that was fun.
Joe Wetmore and CJ have been communicating about these overlay districts, and eventually the CAC is going to become more involved in these types of things. We have sort of a stepwise process that we're working through. You know, we started with the natural resources inventory. Now we're going to get to the scenic resources appendix, and gradually we are creating the documentation that we need. And these overlay districts are ones that, you know, I kept trying to grasp this, but in the future they can be for specific purposes, and essentially they overlay requirements of the planning board. And so CJ, you might want to add to that. We don't need to spend a lot of time at this particular meeting on them specifically, but I sent them to you just to say, okay, this is coming down the pike and this is what they would look like. And it's going to become part of a broader suite of tools that can be used in Lansing.
Yeah, that's a great characterization, Carrie. I would mention that, yes, I would say more than anything right now, the scenic inventory would be really fantastic. You know, in 5 months, New York State is going to finalize the Office of Renewable Energy siting rules within the next 5 months. And one of the key areas that municipalities have some input on actually will be visual impact and visual mitigation. And so if we can get those points and send the folks from MJ Engineering out to do those 360-degree videos or 360-degree views, that would be great. Maybe you've already sent me the locations. My email is a bit hectic. But it would be great to have those spots. And let me know if you have already sent them, but it would be fantastic to have those mapped out. We can just basically hand over that data to the Office of Renewable Energy siting to help with the impact mitigation of the large scale systems, which by all accounts are on their way. So, like it or not.
Maybe that would be a good segue into just, you know, getting some more clarity from Robin, Karen, and others about where we're at with the scenic resources inventory and what your recommendations are for the CAC.
I don't mean to be pushy, just that I could see this being really helpful within the next 5-6 months.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't think we can do anything until the data are compiled in terms of like writing the appendix. I don't know if everyone was copied on the update that Karen sent a few days ago.
Yeah, so what I did was the data from everybody was in all different forms, and so I spent better part of the day, like the whole day on Monday, assembling that. And the next thing that I need to do is double check to make sure that that we haven't missed some of the sites, and I think we probably have. And I can go out and double check those, field truth them once I find out what those are. And my plan was to take a bunch more pictures, but Monday there was about 100-foot visibility. It's a little hard with the shortened days right now to actually get out during daylight and still get my work done. So my plan, I think what I'd really like to do is put everything into a Google Earth document, or maybe do an online interactive map where people can look at the different pictures that we have for some, but not all of the sites, and then go through as a group. And it would probably take the better part of a meeting to just vet them, because some people went and visited sites, some people had opinions about whether they should be deleted from the inventory or not. Some people offered suggestions for new sites, and some did not. So I think the next step, once I get everything together so that it's viewable by everyone, is that we sit down and have a go around. How does that sound?
When would it make sense to do that, Karen? Do you think as early as January, or is that premature?
So, I mean, I've got time off in the next couple of weeks, which is going to give me a lot more flexibility, and my hand is, working and everything too now, which it wasn't.
And are there parts that would be possible to pass off to another CAC member, or does it seem manageable now?
The compiling of the data and the what I'll call the gap analysis of what still needs to be checked, I can do that. What would really be helpful is for everybody who had a section, and there were six sections, that everybody do another drive around, and if there are sites that you would like to nominate, send them to me.
So this would be in addition to the pieces, the different regions that we took, right? You're saying if there's anything else remaining that might not have gotten captured.
No. There's really, this is a two-part thing. One was to field truth what the points were that we had from the county, and with the understanding that some of them were pretty good and some of them were entirely inaccurate and not really great. That would be step one, but step two would be to let's improve it and add some spots that really do need to be put on. And for example, when Robin did her section, she added Ludlowville Falls, which is kind of amazing that it was not
Yeah.
time, but there's obvious sites like that, but then there are some some really pretty vistas that are, I think, probably should supersede some of the views that we have that are just they're good, but they're kind of average.
I think I was probably, I'm definitely one of those people that added some more. I don't know if other people care or want to vet them, but I can send those around to other people if they want to take a look at them. With, like you said, with the diminishing daylight, it's hard to get out in the daytime and look at these sites. But I tried to keep it to a minimal number, but I did add a few. I also spotted one or two in other people's regions, but didn't put them in my spreadsheet to you, Karen, because I didn't want to be overstepping my little region that I was assigned, but I may be able to add one or two more at the risk of making everything a scenic scenic overlay.
No,
But
definitely overstepped as much as you would like. And
Yeah.
I would also say there were a couple, sort of, well, a number of people sort of left it very open of, well, this might be okay, this might not be okay. Just make a decision, and then as a group we can say or not. But for me, it was really hard to go through some of these records and try to interpret, at least which side of the fence initially we're saying it falls on. So that would be great, like to really give your best shot at an assessment would be terrific, because I'm certainly not going to be able to do that from my desk.
I need a reminder here. Are these only areas that are publicly accessible?
Yeah.
There are some, okay, because there are some really amazing vistas and waterfalls that are on private lands that you have to kind of have access to. But okay, those are off the table. Okay, got it.
There are, Todd, I mean, sort of the publicly accessible really is the way to go. I think when they initially did the inventory, it was a windshield survey, and so it was just basically what you could see from the road.
From the road, yep.
And
Okay.
since then, there've been a lot of other interesting things, like the Lansing Town Trail, like the Edwards Preserve that Cornell may not have even owned at that time, but there's some beautiful views from there. And John Greenlee had added some of those in, which was, I thought great, because they're public trails. So, and since, and Todd, if you don't have, I don't think you didn't have a section, but if you have some really special spots, we can always say, yep, we got that already. But if you want to make note of that, that would be wonderful.
Okay, yeah, there are some really special spots out there in Lansing that those of us that walk around without paying attention. Well, I used to work on the cereals farm, so I know some spots there that were just amazingly beautiful, but you would never know it if you didn't actually trespass.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some spots up there at Searles Road, and looking out over the valley.
I think if it helps you, Karen, I made that internal deliberation about whether or not I thought it was worth it to add the new ones, and in sending them to you. I didn't put any in there that I had already considered, but in the end that weren't so great. So I'm in favor of keeping all of them.
Great.
I did take a picture, I canoed the route because all of the spots where I was supposed to be standing were in the water, and took a pretty beautiful picture of the power plant, but I spared you. I was going to include it and, nominate it for a scenic view, but I didn't know if you'd think that was very funny, Karen. So anyway, sounds like we're going to put this on the agenda for January, and we'll go at it.
Don't you love crumbling concrete? We've got lost culverts. We've got crumbling power plants. But yeah,
Right.
so a lot of the well, not a lot, but there were a couple of points that I'm thinking back to yours that were, you had actually more points that you gave me than were in the inventory, and some of them were pretty far from where the points actually mapped out. I think that the view, give or take a couple of 100 feet, is probably not that big of a deal, but we can talk about whether you want me to slide it over to the existing point or use yours. How confident you were about the number that you captured.
Okay.
Karen, are you going to send any of those points to CJ so the 365-degree pictures can be taken or not?
I can do that once I've got it all together. Yeah, sure. Hold on a second. Free to stop.
Does it make sense for us to do that after we have the January meeting and finalize? Okay.
Yeah, it's no rush. I can ask, I'm going to get in touch with MJ Engineering right now and let them know we'll follow up with some kind of table or list. And I want to emphasize also that if you can prioritize, I mean, obviously the most scenic views, but anything you think is scenic within, call it a mile of those bulk transmission lines, those NYSEG bulk transmission lines is where you're going to want to focus.
Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, if we could pick, call it a top, 10 or 20 something to go and have the video taken of, because we can just hand those, that data over, hopefully in return for some they'll give us as well. So, thank you.
Does this have the relevance to the view shed analysis? Is the idea that the view shed analysis that Karen was originally going to do with the points once they're all collated, is that going to be the basis of the environmental overlay, or is that two different things?
We haven't really talked about, first of all, whether anybody really wants to have the viewshed analysis done for sure, or how we're going to select which ones to do, because 70 of them might be a bit of a lift.
I like the view shed idea though, if you can do it.
Yeah, I can do it. Not by January.
No, but it just seems like it's a little bit more tangible than just simply like somebody went out and took a picture looking some direction. I think the view shed gives us a little bit more, something more quantitative and reinforceable than just simply Robin looked this one direction one day and it was awesome.
Right, and if when we get to that point, we're going to need to go and revisit the points that were highly rated, so that we get an actual sense of what the wedge of the view shed is.
Right, but I trust you totally, Karen. That's great.
Okay.
Shall we move on to the NRI?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Could I just say, I just wanted to say one more thing, if I could, about the overlay districts. I could see how that could be confusing, because the data could certainly be used for both, but what I'm thinking is that the Office of Renewable Energy siting, as part of the review for these large scale projects, is going to take into account some local data, and so the more we have for that submission, that will help in the developing some of the mitigation conditions for some of the utility scale solar, regardless of how it will likely be coming in quite a magnitude. So it will be helpful to have that kind of on hand. So, but it can also be used for the scenic overlay district. So it serves double duty. It's a double deliverable. It's very helpful. And let me know, Karen, we have budget with County GIS, and I am happy to send things over to them for any kind of processing.
So, thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate all the GIS work you're doing. I know it's a very specialized skill set, so thanks.
Okay, well, the NRI, our draft copy of it was given to the planning board. And they have it. They can modify it if they want. I haven't looked at it since we sent that to them. I don't know. Have you looked at it, CJ? Has there been any changes by anybody?
Yeah, there was some comments suggested. We're going to get a read from Deb Trumbull, which is really helpful. She's a great copy editor. An editor in general. So she actually called the office and asked Heather for a printed copy. So we'll get that out to her so she can take a look and print. But she's also added some, and a couple of you have also added comments. Hopefully that's easier to use to comment, is the Adobe Cloud thingamahoozy. Hopefully that's easy.
I think you might have replaced the map also in the executive summary.
The first map?
you or Heather might have replaced that map, or maybe not.
Oh, okay. That might have been just been an error. I think
There
I saw
was-
somebody commented on it.
Yeah, there was a duplicate of a map that didn't belong there, and I think we needed the climate change map there or something. So
Yeah, we're getting comments from the planning board now. We're also asking them to comment on the Office of Renewable Energy siting regulations, and also asking them to think about any changes in solar zoning. So they've got kind of a full plate right now, plus all the development review projects. So we'll give them another nudge again to comment. But so far, the feedback I got was very good. They thought it was well put together.
Good. Great. Great. Okay. Do we want to talk a little bit more about the renewable energy siting regulations?
yeah, I wanted to bring up a point, given that there's been so much discussion about using, the former Milliken Station land, and that we know there's a very large coal ash pile there. There's not very much in this about remediation of current sites. And I just wondered what other people thought about that and whether I overlooked information on remediation or whether it's just not there. And I know, the folks who are looking at the power plant future have been tossing this idea around about, how hard to push. And this harkened back to a conversation that we had with them. So I just wanted to put that out there and see what other people's thoughts were.
I thought that they were pretty clear that they were not going to do remediation.
Yeah,
Wasn't that?
that's what I remember.
Yeah, I mean, it was startling and I thought pretty disgusting, but they're not going to do it.
So that would lead me to want to recommend that they do remediation on certain sites. Otherwise, we could be in for a host of environmental problems down the road.
They felt that there were not going to be problems because it was going to be capped. End of discussion.
Yeah.
So are all of these, do all of these sites have monitoring wells or just some of them?
What do you mean all of these sites, Tom?
The fly ash sites.
Well, there's like 50 wells monitoring sites around. I mean, the place is filled with monitoring locations. And
Filled with what?
with monitoring locations, there's monitoring stations throughout it.
And was there anything in the permitting that said they were going to remediate these sites after they left?
I mean, initially,
This is my concern with the solar panels, right? Somehow they have all these things in place, but I have never seen any energy extraction program that ever went back and meaningfully remediated the sites after they were done with it. And so we're accepting that this is going to happen with the solar farms. I don't think it is. It hasn't happened with the strip mining. It didn't happen with the Hanford site in Washington. It's not happening in this site. Why do we believe it's going to happen with any of the renewable energy things either? So,
and we might be talking about two different things here. Are they going to remediate the site prior to putting on the solar panels?
no, after they take them off.
Then that's the second question.
Yeah.
Are they going to remediate after they take them off? But I'm talking about remediate coal ash leachate that is occurring at the site. So that's my worry, that if we put up solar panels, it'll never be remediated.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. I have no I have no reason to believe that that will actually happen, regardless of what is it. I mean, you just simply go bankrupt and move your company to someplace else. So there's no reason to believe that's going to happen. It certainly isn't going to happen with the coal ash. I think we're stuck with this. We have to figure out what's the best way forward without assuming anything is actually going to happen.
The solar farm regs include a decommissioning component.
Right, but is it going to happen? So do all the strip farms out in the Western United States.
Mm-hmm.
I think they have to have a surety
Yeah.
for the dollar amount. I think they have to bond against it.
Okay, you got to trust that's going to be
My
there.
understanding. Well, sure. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
it's
but
like insurance of any other type. But.
I think we would have more leverage with requiring some type of remediation in advance of the solar farm going up, because they can't put it up unless they can remediate. And if you don't have, your coal ash pit lined, or it's improperly or just partially lined, then you've got a site that, for decades is probably going to be leaking. So if we don't recommend that something be put in there now, then the state just, does what they want. And so far, I really haven't seen very strong language. Maybe other people have about pre-siting remediation.
Does anybody have any idea how many acres we're talking about?
I can show you, if you want to let me share the screen, I can show you the view of where the wells are, if that's helpful.
Are you talking just about AES, Tom?
Yeah, around the coal ash.
Well, those are the ones that have to deal with the fly ash or the coal ash. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know about the entire state, but it certainly seems like one of the most likely sites in Lansing. We know that the discussion's on the table.
Well, I'm just curious as to, how much acreage is involved here.
You talking about the acreage of the coal ash, Tom?
Yes.
Just a second. It's just shy of 20 acres.
Okay, so that's really small potatoes compared to the amount of area they want to cover. So they could conceivably set up the panels and not use those 20 acres.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I think the intention is to use ballast or racking systems on that area. That's my understanding, at least.
What is that?
They just sit on the top. You don't have to drill piles in. Solar just kind of sits right on the top of it. It's like little feet. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, I was asking about the Office of Renewable Energy siting regulations, because there is, so section 900-2.4 exhibit 3 is asking about specifically repurposed sites with history of environmental contamination. So there's different phase schedules, ESAs required, whether the site has been under the oversight of DEC or not. I'm assuming it probably already has. So they'll either the DEC will issue a certificate of completion or no further action, or let them know what they're supposed to do. But DEC is going to oversee sites that are already contaminated. At least that's my understanding.
So could they possibly have them continue to monitor any of the wells that are there?
Yeah, they can ask for whatever site management conditions they want to DEC can to issue their certificate under the Office of Renewable Energy Siting. So basically, like, the new scheme is like mega seeker with the State Office of Renewable Energy Siting acting as the planning board, as if they were the town planning board, but with many lawyers. That was supposed to say. Anyway. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail what you're talking about. Just that the large scale project, utility scale projects would have, and that's on page 21 of the first PDF.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering if, is there a way, if we develop those sites for renewable energy siting, maybe there's an opportunity to do double duty and mitigate the impact of the fly ash on the environment in the process of repurposing that land for, let's say, solar panels or something. I assume the concern is heavy metals, right, with the fly ash?
Lots of them, lots of heavy metals.
Lots of heavy metals, yeah. So covering them with solar panels might not be a bad idea, right? You have a way of preventing the amount of water that's actually interacting with those piles. So there might be an opportunity there that could be capitalized on too.
You know, the same amount of water is going to fall on the fly ash, whether or not they're solar panels. It's just going to be concentrated as it flows off rather than.
No, you could put gutters on the solar panels and divert the water away from the fly ash. I don't think that's necessarily true, Karen.
Yeah, I guess that's true. It just doesn't seem practical for a site that size.
Anyway, I don't think we necessarily need to think of this as. I think we could think about this more creatively than just simply thinking that, oh, we have two huge problems piled on top of each other.
Literally.
But in any case, there's a website called Ash Tracker, and out of the 55 monitoring wells, some of which are up gradient of the piles themselves, only one of them didn't exceed one or more parameters in their monitoring, which is a lot. Yeah, so basically virtually every single one of the wells, or the monitoring wells, is in trouble for what's right.
Karen, you're kind of breaking up for me. Can you share the link to that Ash Tracker website in the chat?
Yeah, I can look for it.
I just did a search and it wanted me to buy this domain, so I'm guessing I didn't go to the right site, but I would like to be more informed about this site before I speak about it.
Could you also repeat what you just said?
Can I share my screen for a second?
Sure.
Okay. You can see that I've got my screen is blank. Okay. Can you see that now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So these are the ash piles here. These are the up gradient sites. These are the down gradient sites. And yeah, every single one of them except for this one was in excess. So yeah, let me see if I might have the, I'll look it up for you, Robin. But anyway, that is the configuration. So they're all along the perimeter and then a little bit even down as stuff gets funneled down culverts and so forth, down the way.
I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about really hazardous materials, cadmium, mercury, you know, a slew of them, 15, 18, depending on the site and the well. And so it's a really large concern. And if this gets sort of smoothed over and covered over with solar panels, we'll just have such a long-lasting problem. It could be
This
just
seems like
decades.
This seems like an issue for DEC. And where do they stand on all of this?
Wasn't there part of this whole thing that there was going to be an environmental component to environmental review before they proceeded?
I guess my concern is that DEC has been involved for quite some time, and nothing has been done. And I think there has been some acquiescence to the type of lining that occurred originally, or lack thereof, on that.
Okay, so you're just saying you don't trust that the DEC is going to do that?
I think they're probably overworked and overwhelmed.
Yeah, I think this is I mean, it's great that we're discussing this, but this is a long-term problem, regardless of anything we decide. There is no way that this problem goes away, Carrie. Okay, there's nothing we could possibly do to make this go away in a short term. It's a long-term problem that we've created, and there is no way, absolutely no way to fix it. So solar panels, no solar panels, it's a long-term problem, regardless of anything else we do.
So I guess the question I'm just putting to the CAC is there anything that could be put into these guidelines at this point that could assure Lansing of a cleaner future?
Okay, and this is what I've been saying. When we tangle with the energy industry, we are in deep for these long-term problems, no matter what the energy form is. Okay, and this is a good case in point. This problem's not going away. I don't think that I think we'll have the same problem with any of the renewable resource systems we have put in place. This is just the part of the system that we live in. So we could be upset that we have heavy metals in the environment. We could be upset that solar farms are going to have this like footprint that lasts forever. That's just part of the reality of what we're dealing with. I don't know, Carrie, do you see a solution to this? What are you going to do with the fly ash?
Well, that's where I get down to, they either need to remediate.
It doesn't matter. It's already in the groundwater. That groundwater takes hundreds of years to flow through. The problem is done.
It is in the groundwater, but meanwhile, it's continuing to leach from up above.
Okay, what are we going to do?
There are plants that take up heavy metals, but
yeah, plant all those sunflowers out there you want to. It's not going to fix the problem.
brassicas.
That was my only idea that I was thinking about too, is that I had heard you could plant plants that would uptake heavy metals, but you're saying that's not even going to touch the problem.
But you can do it. You still have to take those plants, harvest them, and dispose of them someplace because they don't have the heavy metals in themselves. So.
Okay. The only solution I'm even aware of, and this is not my area, but I was thinking the same thing David was.
Talk to Beth Honor. She's a phytoremediation expert on this whole thing. But really, we don't need to discuss this too much because it's a done deal, Carrie. I don't. Okay, we can go to Hanford. Decades and decades of problems there. You need to have to live with the reality, and we need to be very, very conscious moving forward that this is what we deal with when we deal with the energy industry.
And the argument at the public meeting was that, well, this is not coal ash slurry, which is the one that triggers actual remediation and cleanup. This is much more stable, even though here we are continuing to measure limits above what's legal, but this is really, really low on their list of priorities, and no sunflower is going to be able to penetrate 100 feet down to pick up the ash that's closest to the groundwater on these ash mountains. And so I think it's a really good one. And
I feel like we're going to get
any traction on it.
I'm hearing that nothing short of hiring an excavator to dig out all the soil and move it to be someone else's problem is going to solve this.
And I think one problem is we all want electricity. We all want our, we want to live well. I mean, I've been in countries where people live without electricity. Do they live well? No, they don't. And they have other kind of pollutions because they don't have latrines. But I happen to agree with Todd, even though it's one of the more depressing things imaginable. We have to live with pollution. It's awful. It's just awful. But at least what's left of my lifetime, I would love to think for my grandchildren's lifetime, things could be all cleaned up, but I'm not that optimistic.
Todd's comments, do they think though, like at the state level with such, with Cuomo's kind of major climate action plan and the big push for these solar farms, there could be some attention brought to imposing some cleanup of these solar facilities, some language as these farms are developing. But I don't think little town of Lansing is going to make that happen, although we could possibly team up with other municipalities and it could feed up the chain and be put into some language that NYSERDA uses as they're moving forward with these. So
I think David's right, because that's the future.
yeah,
The whole plant is the past and this one's the future.
yeah.
Maybe.
Not that it's particularly cheerful, but that whole NYSEG landfill at the end of Fort Hill Road, stretching all the way to Andra, across towards your property north of Fort Hill, that is also fly ash in there from the power plant, which is presumably gravity working the way gravity does. It's draining right into Salmon Creek, and I don't know anything about monitoring wells at the base of that hill. So, it's pretty and it's fun to walk on, but there's a world of bad going on underneath there. I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, and see, we tried not to disturb the land. We have pastures. It's the best thing imaginable because we don't plow it up.
Yeah, but that's NYSEG's land. I'm not talking about your land.
No, I just meant near it. Meant near it. Yeah, I know. On that happy note,
Move on.
we'll move on.
Yeah, I think have the wisdom to find the things we can actually change and not fight these battles that we're not going to win. It's like getting rid of all the coyotes. It's not going to happen.
I like coyotes.
I like coyotes too.
Well, sticking with the Office of Renewable Energy Siting Regulations, one thing I'm concerned about is you fence off an area of hundreds to thousands of acres. What do you do about all of these wildlife corridors that are really important? And
That's a great point.
I haven't seen anything in the regs about that at all.
Are they entire perimeters fenced of hundreds or thousands of acres?
All of the solar farms I've seen are fenced. So, I mean, how do you do it in a way that wildlife can still move around?
Awesome question, Tom. I've wondered about this myself.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if we get birds, we don't have to worry about. Birds would be fine. We don't have to worry about insects and pollinators. So the main things that you're talking about are reptiles and mammals that would be most impacted, unless maybe another group I'm not thinking about. But there's a lot of examples out west of pronghorn and desert tortoises being impacted. But in the east, I'm trying to think about this in our region. It would be a lot of white-tailed deer that might be impacted that would actually be in an agricultural landscape. I'm assuming that these are in ag landscapes. So we're talking about deer, we're talking about maybe some turtles that are traversing areas. it to be a wildlife corridor, it has to be contiguous with habitat. So
Well-
to answer that question, or to even be a wildlife corridor, it has to be contiguous with something or nearly contiguous.
Well, for example, it seems to me that most stream beds, whether they're intermittent or perennial, are wildlife corridors. At least that seems to be the case around here. There's all kinds of animals running up and down these things. And so how do you deal with something like that with these solar farms? Do you,
Something.
So amphibians definitely would use riparian corridors. Turtles would be an example of a species that might be using those pathways to move around and remain in their habitat. And they have very linear habitat if they're really water associated. But I'm not aware of any turtle-friendly fencing. It's just not a thing that I really have ever heard of. I'm not super concerned about the deer because we have an overabundance of deer. I haven't seen these fences. I don't know if you're going to end up with a situation where the deer are getting inside and getting stuck in there, but the deer are overabundant. We don't.
Yeah, so Tom and Robin, I have a question for you guys, because there's all these exclosure experiments that are done on Cornell's lands. I don't know who's doing that. What are they learning, and can they provide us information on what the impacts might be from huge areas that are being excluded of letting herbivores access the landscape? I don't know the answer, but it seems like we have experiments in place that could help us answer those questions.
So the ones that I'm most familiar with are studies of forest regeneration. So that would be looking at the effects of deer exclosures on understory plants, spring perennials, that forest vegetation. And my understanding, I may be wrong, is that these projects aren't going to be anywhere near a forest. So they would be in open spaces that would be cited as agriculture. So the experience that I can think of, like we have those exclosures in sapsucker woods at the lab, they're not relevant because it's not a forest environment that you're talking about, Tom, or solar panels. So we're actually putting in a proposal to look at some with campus to try to find ways to make them bird friendlier. But birds do not have the mobility issues that other species have. So I think we have to look at, there's really not a threatened or endangered species that comes to mind when I'm thinking about those areas. So your terrestrial animals are going to be things like raccoons, skunks. I don't know that we have fishers in this area. Fishers don't really, do we? Do they use the ag lands?
We got them at our house.
You have fishers?
Yeah, they're very scary.
Foxes, coyotes, these are all going to be species that wouldn't have access to that land. But I'm seeing links are popping up here.
I'm curious to know from Andra and John whether excluding large amounts of acreage might increase deer populations on your ag lands.
It would definitely concentrate it, especially anything that's directly adjacent to it. That's going to get inundated until predators get the population back in check, I would think, which wouldn't take long if you have those areas are going to be confined. It wouldn't take long for the population to be affected. But the farm,
I think it depends on the hedgerows and the forests that are around your land. If you have a lot of ag land that doesn't have these, then you don't have the deer that we do, that because we have lots of hedgerows. And I think if they put up these big solar farms, well, they're not going to put them in hedgerows, or they're going to take the hedgerows down. And that's the end of where the deer sleep. Maybe not where they eat, but definitely where they lay down and sleep.
Yeah, so unless they're made,
Paul Curtis and Bern Blossy, who do a lot of this work with deer, a lot of work with that stuff. Deer control, management, exposures. So there's two experts at Cornell who could bring a lot to this conversation, I think.
What were their names?
Paul Curtis, and then Bern Blossy. So a lot of the exposure work that I've seen around here, they've been involved with all that. Paul Curtis has done a lot of stuff on deer population control in Cayuga Heights, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, and I know Peter Groffman worked with some people out in the like Yellowstone Park and stuff, and looked at exclosures there and saw how it changed the ecosystem when you didn't allow herbivores to harvest the plants, and it had some interesting shifts in what happened ecologically. I can't remember what it was exactly, but I think Tom is right that taking these big areas and excluding the wildlife from being able to access them. I mean, of course, Robin, not the birds. There could be some significant shifts in what we see happening. As a scientist, I think this is an opportunity to do an interesting experiment that I probably couldn't get permission to do otherwise.
Well, has anybody seen in the regs anything about this?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, so I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
I did see something about there was some language about a vegetation screen that was relevant to we were calling them buffers, but the language looks like it's vegetation screen in the ORAS guidelines, but it was very minimal. There was just a very minimal amount of it. Yeah, I don't know that actually. I mean, when you think about long, huge barriers to wildlife movement, there are things like border walls. There's some stuff we could look at that's been done with a proposed border wall. I mean, people have had more time to research that and look at the potential impacts. And then there's vast amounts of fencing out west, but in the east, there's not as much huge tracts of land fenced in. It's just not, it's not something you see a lot of out here. So I would have to go, I'd have to go back and look at some.
We have the Seneca Army Depot is like our one case study, right? Where weird things happened.
Right here.
Yeah.
That seems like it's a big enough area where you can have a pretty much complete ecosystem within the fence.
Now, I thought these things were all mowed and manicured, and essentially you wouldn't want wildlife within the arrays, other than pollinators and birds and small mammals.
Sometimes they are bringing in, it's becoming pretty common to bring in sheep grazing.
Yeah.
Well, Tom, are you thinking that we should recommend some particular wording?
Yeah.
About corridors?
Yeah, that thing that I put together about plant buffers, I kind of ended with that. It's just a paragraph. And, you know, CJ wants to put together, you know, comments. I think that's one thing that probably should be included, because I just didn't see any attention being paid to that at all. And it is not such a big deal if it's 25 acres, but if it's 1,000 acres, it becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. And do we have issues with bear in the town of Lansing? That's one animal that I could think of that would really alarm people if it was suddenly displaced. People might not be as alarmed by a displaced porcupine or a displaced coyote, but they might well be alarmed if there's a displaced bear with nowhere else to go.
And what's the purpose of the fencing is to keep people out, or is it? Is that right?
I think that's the main thing. It's a liability issue.
Okay.
And I feel like bear are pretty uncommon in this area, but of course the regulations are applicable to a much broader area than just the town of Lansing. But that might be one species that if I was going to pick an umbrella species to talk about having impacts to humans, that might be one that I would think about.
Well, I think we can pretty much assume that within 5 years, there's going to be bears in Lansing. Most likely, they're down and they're around in Cuba Heights, and they've been sighted around Stewart Park quite a bit, and it's the corridor to come up the lake. So, I think we need to also think ahead, and that's not all that far ahead.
Yeah.
I think bear are going to be pretty common here. Okay.
Coyote and
There's
red
been a
fox.
sighting in Salmon Creek area of a bear, and there's been a sighting by the lake of a bear.
In Salmon Creek too, really?
Yep. By one of the hunters that hunted on our property, because we have property down to Salmon Creek. Yeah.
Just recently?
This was last fall,
Oh, cool.
kind of recently.
That's what my dog would do when we're on a hike seeing a bear.
Yeah.
She wants to chase everything. She might have a different idea of the bear.
So I'm looking specifically at Tom's paragraph where it says it's important that the town maintain not only visual buffers, but wildlife corridors. I think it's a little unfair to ask the solar developers to maintain a corridor if it doesn't exist. So it's hard to talk about, is it their responsibility to maintain something if it doesn't currently exist? Are we asking them to plant a wildlife corridor and vegetation buffer, or are you asking for it to be maintained if it's already
No,
there?
I'm asking for it not to be fenced, so there's some connectivity.
So I would guess I would make this language really clear then about existing versus creative vegetation communities, because I'm reading the visual buffer as something that they would be responsible for doing as a screen.
Yeah.
I'm reading that differently from a wildlife corridor, which is something that would be existing in the landscape that they would have to protect. Is that,
well, just not
is that
fence
kind
it
of
in.
Yeah, I share your concern about the streams. The streams are a good example of, if you just put a hard barrier across the stream, or you fence in a large part of it, you're going to be excluding some animals for sure.
I don't think they're, I don't know if that will be allowed. Well, it depends on the order, I think. But there's pretty, they have a bunch of tables of regulations regarding the stream corridors. And some for terrestrial ecology as well. They are asking for a analysis, identification of species, and then an analysis of interconnections, wildlife habitats, and wildlife travel corridors. Also for threatened or endangered species and other species and species of special concern. I think of anything that's anywhere near the facility. Plant communities too, it looks like. It's Exhibit 11, 900-2.12.
So they have to identify the corridors, but not keep them open.
I think they have to provide a wildlife characterization. I think we talked about this a little bit last time about how they have to come up with that net benefit thing that I was talking about.
Yeah, if there's an alternative to fencing, I think that's kind of, if I'm reading Tom's language correctly, can we look for alternatives to putting fences up? What's the purpose of the fences? Are there alternative ways to meet the same objectives without the fences? And then we don't have this problem. I don't want to speak for you, Tom. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's right. Like if it was just a vegetative buffer, then you know, animals can pass through that pretty easily.
Right.
But
And
again, all the solar farms I've seen, they have fences around them.
That's a security, it's a security fence. It's over 6 foot fence, or is it about 6 feet?
Well, it's usually a 6-foot fence with some barbed wire on top.
Mhm.
With barbed wire on top? I know that we've had research plots that were fenced with 6 foot fences that deer could even get into. They can
Oh,
jump
yeah.
a 6 foot
Yeah.
fence,
Sure.
but with barbed wire on the top, that might be a deterrent. I think it would be useful to be really, really clear what this language is asking for, at least the kind of buffer. I'm talking about the buffer document that Tom's
Mhm.
is if you're asking that something be created versus maintained, those are two different things, and I'm still not clear about what.
Yeah, not something that has to be maintained. It's just something that's open so animals can go through it.
Well,
Because-
I would further assume that if it's on there in a permitted area, they're going to clear most of the vegetation and put solar panels on it. Is that?
I'm hoping they're going to put vegetation there and maintain it to keep the soil in place.
I don't really know how solar arrays work, but the ones in my mind's eye is has no vegetation and is cleared
No.
for development.
It's really hard, and all the farmers can tell you, it's hard to keep vegetation out of places where you don't want the vegetation to be, right? So it's gonna
This
come
is
back.
why they have the sheep that come in and keep
That's why they have the
everything
sheep,
down.
exactly.
I saw some really creative stuff on, you know, some ideas about bringing in plants to attract pollinators, good from nearby farms, and a lot of cool ideas going on about solar farms these days and the vegetation control. But and yeah, in you know, creating, maintaining a basically a meadow for grazing of sheep and that kind of thing.
Robin, you should go see the solar farm on Fenner Road, which is off Lansingville Road. It's not really far at all. And then you'd get an idea, even though it's not as big as the other ones that are being proposed, but you'd get an idea of what the fence looks like and what the solar panels look like.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen some, but the ones that are implemented by Cornell may be totally different. The ones that are in Cortland might be totally different. I really don't know.
Well, this one's right up the road from
what
me.
these new ones will entail.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's kind of different schools of thought about whether you want to be land sharing or land sparing when it comes to wildlife. Do they actually want to, you don't want to attract wildlife to areas that are going to be unproductive or where they'll be not able to reproduce or not succeed. Like, we don't often want to encourage bears to the urban core of, you know, downtown Ithaca. So that would be not a land sharing approach. It's like the difference between an organic farm that encourages lots of native animals and a intensely mechanized farm that you don't want wildlife in it because it's, you know, it's not good habitat. So, you know, there's two schools of thought about how these, you know, to use in agriculture, that's an example, land sharing or land sparing. I don't have enough information to know if it's a good idea or not to be planting or, you know, keeping lots of vegetation corridors around them or through them if it's dangerous.
Yeah, here's where I think whoever brought up Kurt's name, I think he'd be a good person to consult on this topic, because I don't think we have enough knowledge amongst us to really, you know, maybe these things have to be parsed out into, you know, if it's 1,000 acres, maybe they need to be fenced off into smaller sections so you still have corridors. But yeah, I would love to hear somebody who's an expert on this type of issue provide input into what, because I don't know what decision to make. I understand the concern, Tom. I think you're right to bring it up. Even though it's way outside my wheelhouse, I think it's a legitimate concern. And as Robin says, if we're gonna like squish all the bears into the places where people actually are, that's probably not a great thing.
I would be careful just throwing the word wildlife corridor around because it's really species specific. A corridor for a grizzly bear is not a corridor for a wild turkey. And it's like saying you're going to create habitat. Well, for what? You know, a deer has habitat, a turkey has habitat, a turtle has habitat. You can't just say we're going to have a wildlife corridor without saying who it's for.
Yeah, no, I agree. So what are the keystone habitats we need to maintain?
I like your idea actually of having them break up the fencing so that wildlife can move through the area and just not be completely obstructed. I don't know how feasible that is or if they would go for it, but that's at least
I don't either,
an idea.
But yeah, your point is well taken.
Yeah, that's seems to me a reasonable idea. Is you don't have one giant fence around 1,000 acres. You have a couple of pathways through there that different species can move through.
Especially riparian zones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So CJ, you're compiling still comments from different entities for submission.
Yeah, absolutely.
Has anybody else
Hopefully
brought the issue of wildlife corridors?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I have to think about it. I've been looking at so many comments about these regulations, so I don't remember who exactly said what. Sierra Club has chimed in, and American Farmland Trust.
The plan is to submit by December. Sorry.
Monday. Yep.
Yeah.
Monday. I think Monday at midnight is the deadline.
Okay.
So.
This Monday?
This Monday. Yep.
So we don't really have time to consult these other people.
Well, here's the thing, and you're bringing up really good points, and the application process, assuming they get these rules promulgated by April, which they're supposed to do, right? Like an April 21st deadline. I anticipate we'll probably see applications like in the very next weeks following that. And the town will be able to apply for what they were calling intervenor funding, or, it's like a pot of money for host communities to hire third-party experts to be able to give the town advice on parts of the utility scale solar application. So that's one thing we're paying a lot of attention to, because that's going to need to be a significant chunk of change for consultants. I'm sure just the biologists alone are going to be a small mint, I would think.
Well, that's good to know. So that's something we could kind of prepare for a little bit, some of our meetings before April then. Just kind of put some thoughts together, some things we might want.
Yeah, things that you would want to learn about, especially because we can also likely dip into another pot of money set up by NYSERDA for coal impacted communities. So communities that are for transitioning away from fossil fuels are given a special priority at the NYSERDA, line, shall we say.
Yeah.
And the power plant committee did put in a respond to there was a request for an RFI issued by NYSERDA not too long ago, asking kind of what our needs would be. And we did indicate that we'd be looking for help on kind of an EIS level project, basically, environmental impact statement level project, and it can be associated with the power plant, but I mean, you could argue that any land that's being considered for utility scale solar is kind of in some ways part of the power plant. I mean, if you think about the history of it. So I think we're in a good position to be able to apply for this kind of funding for the town to be able to hire third-party consultants. I mean, we're gonna have some say in about a dozen different sections, which is where we'll want help with. But they're going to move fast. I mean, they want these projects approved in 12 months. So they're going to haul. So we're paying very close attention to any deadlines. So be sure to let you know.
So how about, because we have this Monday midnight deadline, I'll take that paragraph and modify it somewhat, and I'll send it around, and get comments and incorporate those, and I'll send it to you, CJ, and you can include it as, you know, part of the comments on the regs.
Yeah, please look at the regulations. I know it's like 120 something pages, but you know, you can do some keyword searches by PDF, you know, for things that are really important to you. And know that this is not the end of it. I mean, this is just the public comment piece. They're going to probably make some changes to the draft regulations based on this. So we'll have another round, I'm guessing, with the Office of Renewable Energy siting. Because, you know, if any of you have tuned into the public hearings, I mean, the comments are they're all over the spectrum. So, yeah. Well, yes, absolutely. Please circulate the comments. If you can get back to me by close of business on Monday, I'll probably end up submitting comments around, I don't know, 6 or 7 p.m.
Okay.
Shouldn't you be home sipping tea by then, CJ?
I could sip tea and submit comments, of course. Absolutely. Just to give people a little bit of extra time. You know, it's a good when there's a big old deadline to give a little buffer there. So, yeah, no worries.
Okay. So number 9 on our agenda, Planning Board Solar Subcommittee, help with resources. This is about the buffer planning thing. David, thank you for sending that stuff out. I'll try and, so it looks like Dean Shea would like something very shortly. So I'll take what you have and I'll incorporate into what I already have, and I'll pass it on to them and see if that's what they're looking for. And if they want more information, well, they're going to have to wait. But they have a pretty tight. I think what they want to do is somehow incorporate some of this in the solar law, and there seems to be a rush to get that done.
I mean, things like in the short term, all we can do is kind of provide some ideas of things that have to be under consideration, you know, sort of thing. Not like identifying specific plants to plant, and I think that's too much. We have to actually, someone would have to do some studies, I think, in the region to see what's really best.
Well, so I did talk to Dan Siegel, and he sounded very enthusiastic about helping Lansing figure out what kind of buffer plannings would be appropriate. And I think he'd be as good a person as any to kind of lead that.
Yeah, he would be very good.
Yeah. Okay, so are there any other new topics that we want to talk about? Everybody's burned out? Okay. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
I second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Opposed? Okay, we are adjourned unless anybody else wants to add a little more to the discussion.
Just an FYI, town board is anticipated to be accepting the annual report at their next meeting. So thanks for putting that together.
Okay. Well, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
Right. Thanks a lot.
Okay.
Bye.
Good seeing you.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
See you next.